It is October 1930. Inside the walls of a Lahore jail, a 23-year-old revolutionary, Bhagat Singh, sits in solitary confinement, waiting to be hanged. Over the previous year, his involvement in the Delhi bombing and the Lahore conspiracy case had made him a household name. He was a visible enemy of the British Empire, and his popularity across India had surged. But along with that fame came a persistent rumor from his own peers. Singh had openly rejected the existence of God. Some of his friends concluded that this atheism was simply the arrogance of a young man whose head had been inflated by celebrity. One friend challenged him directly, telling Singh that it was easy to boast in days of peace, but when his final days arrived, fear would break his pride and force him to pray. To answer this accusation, Singh spent his final days writing. Looking at the published essay here, titled "Why I Am an Atheist," right in the opening paragraph, he asks if his lack of belief is due to undue pride and vanity. Over the following pages, he sets out to prove that his atheism is separate from his ego. It is a rational, calculated ideology designed to dismantle the superstitions that kept his people subjugated. Singh begins by clarifying the timeline of his beliefs. He points out that he had stopped believing in God long before the bombings, back when he was an obscure, unknown young man. His childhood was orthodox. He was raised by a strict Arya Samaji grandfather, and as a boy he lived in a boarding house where he spent hours every morning and evening chanting religious mantras. Even when he joined the revolutionary movement, the leaders he followed were devout. They went to the gallows reciting hymns and praised God in their secret political pamphlets. Singh followed them as a romantic idealist. The shift happened when his revolutionary party faced intense opposition. Singh realized that romanticism and blind faith were insufficient tools for fighting a heavily armed empire. He needed a realistic strategy. He turned to a study of global history, focusing on men who had successfully overthrown oppressive regimes. He read the writings of Karl Marx. He studied Vladimir Lenin, Leon Trotsky, and the anarchist Mikhail Bakunin. He noted a common thread. They relied on material analysis and were all atheists. By the end of 1926, Singh had replaced his mysticism with political realism. His atheism was the result of a demand for concrete proof, rather than a swollen ego. With the vanity charge handled, Singh moves to his philosophical argument. He asks, if an all-knowing, all-powerful God created the universe, why did he create a world that is a constant hell of starvation and woe? If a supreme being watches millions suffer and does not stop it, Singh argues that deity is deriving a morbid pleasure from the misery. He compares this version of God to human tyrants like Nero and Genghis Khan. He applies this logic to how religious doctrines operate politically. As this cycle illustrates, concepts like karma suggest that the poor are suffering today because of sins they committed in a previous life, pushing the blame for poverty onto the individual. Singh argues that the privileged classes, whether they are high-caste Brahmins or British imperialists, use these theories to justify the wealth they hoard and the power they exert over others. This creates a psychological trap. By convincing a starving laborer that his misery is a divine punishment, the ruling class robs him of the reasoning power needed to question the system. It kills the instinct to rebel. Singh argues that every religion eventually becomes a supporter of the tyrannical institutions that claim authority from a supreme being. Because this divine sanction cannot be revoked by humans, he concludes that the very idea of an unchallengeable ruler is the foundational model for human slavery. Singh's theories were tested when the police surrounded him in Lahore. CID officials offered to spare his life if he turned informant, while officers actively urged him to pray. He refused the deal, and he refused to pray. He realized that if he only bragged about being an atheist in days of comfort, his philosophy meant nothing. He would not pretend to believe to ease his own anxiety. He understood the psychological comfort that religion provides. A devout Hindu might expect to be reborn as a king. A Muslim or Christian could dream of paradise as a reward for their earthly sacrifices. Singh strips away these comforts. Look at the wording he uses to describe his fate on the gallows. When the rafters move from under his feet, it will be the final moment. His soul, as he writes, shall all be finished there. To face permanent erasure without the opiate of faith takes unshakable strength. When a person steps onto the scaffold depending entirely on themselves, Vanity evaporates, only conviction remains. He chose to die with no expectation of divine reward. He sacrificed his single, finite life with the intent of triggering an era of liberty for the people who would outlive him. Bhagat Singh's atheism was a refusal to pass the burden of justice on to a supreme being. He left behind the legacy of a man who stood erect, defied the empire, and walked toward his own end armed with reason.